Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us today. My name is Audrey Dow, and I'm the Senior Vice President here at the Campaign for College Opportunity. I know so many of you tuned in today in excitement for the much anticipated 2021 State of Higher Education for Latinx Californians report. This is actually the fifth Latinx Higher Education Summative Report the campaign has produced since our very first report in 2012, nearly a decade ago. And this has now really become a seminal report for all Californians. And while a lot has changed really in the last decade, one thing hasn't, and that is how inextricably tied the Latinx community is to California. For California's entire history, Latinx leaders have contributed to the richness of our state. From our earliest Mexican American governors, the hundreds of thousands of patriots that have served and continue to serve in our armed forces, the thousands that run businesses and drive innovation, harvest and feed our nation through their labor in the rich farmlands of our great Central Valley, to the brave labor, civil rights, immigrant rights leaders working toward that creed that we all strive for, a more perfect union. Indeed, it was our Latinx community that ushered California through the darkest days of the pandemic, serving as essential workers in healthcare, goods movement, food service, housing, teaching, and so much more. It was indeed the Latinx community that paved the way through the pandemic for all of us. You all know that California is home to the largest group of Latinx people in the country, with over 15 million Latinx people calling California home. Latinx represent California's largest demographic group, and today are 43% of all undergraduates in the state. Moreover, the Latinx community is just not today's present, but it's the future of California. More than half of California's K-12 population are youth of the state, are Latinx. So when I say that there's an inextricable tie between the Latinx community and California, it's not an understatement. And whether Latinx succeed, thrive, and prosper is the business of the state. It's the business of each of our colleges and universities, and each of us, if we want to collectively succeed, thrive, and prosper. This is why 17 years ago, the Campaign for College Opportunity founders, David Wolf and Steve Weiner, would not accept a no from Antonia Hernandez when they asked her, as then president and general counsel of MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund, to co-found the Campaign for College Opportunity. While the Campaign for College Opportunity is laser focused on increasing college access and completion, we understand that there is no success, no progress without the full inclusion of the Latinx community. There are nearly 200 guests that are joining us today, and I'd like to get to know you just a little bit better as best as we can via Zoom. So I invite you now to take our quick poll, telling us a little bit about what sector you're from and what region you're representing today. This is our best attempt to get to know you. Great, and do we have our poll results yet? Well, we can see here that we have higher education advocates, we have some students, we have Almost half of our attendees today are college faculty or administrators, so welcome to all of you. We have some policymakers and other folks representing different areas. In terms of regional representation, we have a large group coming in from Los Angeles, from the Inland Empire, the Bay Area, and San Diego. Thank you so much, really, for all of you being with us today. Like many of you who I know are on this call, higher education was a transformative force for my own family. My grandfather came to this country from Mexico as a panadero, working across the communities of LA's East Side, striving to make a better life for the Diaz family. My father, who came to this country at the age of 10, was actually the first in our family to go to college when he went to LA Trade Tech and earned a certificate as an electrical technician. That certificate put him on a career pathway that afforded him steady work, health benefits, retirement savings, worker protections, and the means to send his 2 daughters to 4-year universities. Today's economy is even more demanding of workers with higher and higher levels of educational attainment, and the value of a college degree continues only to grow. In fact, during this devastating COVID-19 pandemic that has taken such a toll on our Latinx communities across the state and nation, it was those with a bachelor's degree that were least likely to lose their jobs, more likely to be able to work from home, safe from daily exposure to the virus, and more likely to have health insurance. Quite frankly, a bachelor's degree saved lives. And because too few Latinx adults have a bachelor's degree, the Latinx community felt the brunt of the pandemic. Indeed, only 14% of Latinx adults in the state of California in 2021 have a bachelor's degree or higher. And despite the fact that our Latinx communities understand the value of a college degree and are enrolling in college at higher numbers than ever before, only half of those who go to college are prepared by our institutions, are supported by our institutions to graduate. Our 2021 State of Higher Education for Latinx Californians is rich with data, it's rich with good news, and it's also rich with actions we can all take to tackle the not so good news. As we kick off into a much deeper dive into the data, I want to thank our dedicated research team who made this report possible, including our report authors, our Campaign for College Opportunity President, Michelle Siqueiros, and our Senior Director of Policy Research, Vikash Reddy. I want to thank our research associates and our fellows, Tylar Campbell, Alma Orozco, Doug Lee, David Solman, and Brianna Ramirez, who contributed numerous data searches, copy editing to the report. I'd also like to thank our stellar communications team that's responsible for the beauty and accessibility of this report, including Lily Garcia and Amber Roman. Conducting good research is a big endeavor, and we are so grateful to the many national and state experts that reviewed this report. Victor Sainz, Diana Cervantes, Armando Lizarraga, Gabriel Rodriguez Limas, all from the UT Austin, and Veronica Terriquez with the UCLA Chicano Studies Research Center. I also want to thank the California Community Colleges Chancellor's Office, the California State University Chancellor's Office, and the University of California for providing data, responding to our questions, and offering their own feedback on the report. So a little bit more housekeeping before we kick off. First of all, we are going to have an opportunity for all of you to submit any questions you may have about the data, about the recommendations, and about how you can contribute to improving Latinx degree attainment. So please, as we're going along, type your questions directly into the Q&A chat, and we'll be happy to take those during our Q&A session for the end of this webinar. If you are on social media, and we encourage you to expand the conversation there, please feel free to share the report using the bit.ly you see here. Join the conversation using the hashtag Latinx in higher ed, and tag us using our Twitter handles, which you can see here. You can also find the full report, the recording of this webinar once we're done today, quotes, and other collateral for the 2021 State of Higher Education for Latinx Californians report on our website, collegecampaign.org. So with that, it is really my pleasure to introduce again our Senior Research Director, report co-author, Dr. Vikash Reddy. Vikash.
Thank you, Audrey. And I want to just add echo my gratitude to my co-author, Michelle Siqueiros, who was fabulous on this project, our research team, our expert reviewers, and also our panelists and participants today, as well as everybody who's logged on to hear about this data and to see the story the data tell. We start out with a picture, a baseline of 87% of 19-year-olds, Latinx 19-year-olds in California have a high school diploma. Right? That's a strong start and something that we should be proud of, and something that I think is indicative of a population that is pursuing education. One of the things that we have to remember, though, especially in California, is that the high school diploma by itself, good, but the A through G requirements are really where we need to set that baseline and the requirements that we ought to set. Currently, fewer than half, around 44% of high school graduates in California, Latinx graduates, I should say, are graduating meeting the A through G requirements for that guarantee eligibility for the UC and the CSU applications. We need to raise that up. And again, it's important to note that that's among high school graduates, and graduation rates are also different for white students and Latinx students graduating from California's high schools. In terms of college attendance, 72% of Latinx higher education students in California attend a California community college. And that includes 66% of first-time freshmen. So if we're going to address the portrait of degree attainment that Audrey showed you in her slides, that road runs directly through California's community colleges. And that system, I can't overstate how important that system is to the future of Latinx Californians in higher education in the state. We have some really good news to share, or I should say PPIC has shared this, but we're going to amplify it because it is really good news. In terms of placement reforms, the California community colleges experienced placement reforms first brought about through Assembly Bill 705 that guaranteed students access to transfer level coursework and eliminated the use of remedial placement tests for placement in California's community colleges. For Latinx students before the reform, just 8% were able to complete transfer level math in their first semester. That quadrupled to 33% after the reform. Prior to the reform in English, it went from 20%. Post-reform, almost tripled to 56%. At the Cal States, we've also seen increased access to transfer level coursework through Executive Order 1110 that has eliminated remedial coursework and instituted both the summer bridge program for students as well as co-requisite support in their first year's courses. There too, we've seen rates for students completing their transfer level coursework in their first year among Latinx students skyrocketed. And at the UC, the elimination of the SAT has produced a record number of applications from Latinx Californians. And we have seen admissions rates that, for the first time, according to preliminary data, look like for Latinx Californians applying to the UC are higher than those for white Californians applying to the UC. Now, these enormous changes must be protected. We've got to work to fortify and strengthen the reforms from Assembly Bill 705. We need to make sure that access to transfer level coursework at the UC or the CSU, I beg your pardon, isn't restricted by additional course requirements in quantitative reasoning. And at the UC, we need to make sure that not only do we drop the requirement for the test submission or the score submission when applying, but drop the use of the SAT and ACT in admissions altogether. What about the impact of these changes on our student body? Well, we know that the California community colleges have one of the most diverse student bodies. And in the body of our report, we also note that the first year class for the CSUs for the first time now reflects the diversity of California's high school graduating class. At the UC system-wide, only 25% of students are Latinx. This despite 52% of high school graduates in California being Latinx. We have to do better to recruit Latinx students and admit them to the UC and our Cal States and community colleges. In terms of outcomes among Latinx students at the community colleges, we've seen tremendous growth in the last few years. But we still see persistent equity gaps that we must work to address as we support students to earn their degrees, transfer from community colleges to 4-year universities, and join the workforce. At our community colleges, currently just 1 out of 10 Latino students who enrolled in the community college in 2015 or 16 graduated within 4 years. Among Latinas, that was 17%, right? But that's still fewer than 1 in 5. In terms of transfer, where we know that most students who are enrolling in the California community colleges have the goal of transferring to a 4-year university, among Latinos, that 17% are doing that in 4 years. This is among students who enrolled in 2015-16. Their Latina peers, that's 1 in 4, but still, after 4 years, those numbers need to be higher. And as I noted earlier, 2/3 of Latinx students are starting their higher education journey at a California community college. If we're going to make sure that we address degree attainment, we have to make sure that we address transfer rates from community college to 4-year institutions. One of the ways that we've worked to address those is through the creation of the associate degree for transfer. And I have some great news here to report for Latinx students. More than half of associate degree earners who are Latinx are earning associate degrees for transfer. And we know these degrees confer guarantees to students who enroll at the CSU of automatic junior standing and making sure that they only have to earn the 60 credits required to make sure that they get out on time and save time and money. At the Cal States, we've seen tremendous growth in graduation rates on a 4-year especially level for Latinx students, more than doubling for both Latino and Latina students who enroll as freshmen, first-time full-time students. But that's still fewer than 1 in 5 Latinos and just 29% of Latinos who are graduating in 4 years from the Cal State University. We need to do more to support these students to make sure that they have the resources they need to graduate on time. Among transfer students, we see, again, tremendous growth, but still here, among Latinx students, among Latinas, that's 50%, around half of those who enroll as transfer students graduating in what we would consider the on-time 2 years. Now, that's nearly equal to their 2 white women who are also applying and transferring to the CSU, but still half is not enough. We need to do better to support students to complete their bachelor's degrees in a reasonable amount of time. Among our public institutions, the UCs have the highest graduation rates for Latinx students. Here too, we've seen growth on the order of 10 percentage points over the last 6 years for Latinx students of both genders enrolling in the CSU as freshman students. Again, we note just the equity gaps between Latinx students and their white peers, and we note still that there is room to grow for both Latinos and Latinas who are enrolling at the UC. Similar story with transfer students to the UC. 4-year graduation rates, I will note here, quite high, and that is encouraging and something that we are happy to see. But among students transferring to the UC, still only half of Latinos and around 2/3 of Latinos are completing their bachelor's degrees within 2 years of transferring. And that is still, as I say, around 7 percentage points behind their white peers, and that gap has remained pretty persistent over the last several years. Looking at another critical aspect of the higher education experience We need to ensure we're doing everything we can to diversify our faculty. Faculty members at our universities are important in terms of role models and mentorship, in terms of making sure that our students can see themselves in their role models and in the people who are at the front of their classrooms. At the UC, there are 90 Latinx students per Latinx faculty member compared to 9 white students per white faculty member. We need to do better to address that ratio. At the Cal States, it's 208 Latinx students per Latinx faculty member compared to 18 white students per white faculty member. And at the California community colleges, that ratio goes to 304 versus 48. There are all sorts of strategies, and we talk about some of them in our report, and you'll hear about some of them from our experts on this panel as well. That was a really quick snapshot of the data. I know that the data is important and underlies a lot of this report, but I think the most important part of what we're doing here today is going to be in the panelists who follow me. And it's my pleasure to introduce Mike Munoz, the interim, though that's a couple of too many syllables for me, superintendent and president at Long Beach City College. Mike's going to talk to us about their journey using data like these to catalyze change and the leadership required as we pursue equity in higher education in California. Dr. Munoz.
Thank you, Vikash. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mike Munoz, and I have the great privilege of serving as the interim superintendent president at Long Beach City College. I want to start by thanking the Campaign for College Opportunity for their groundbreaking work in providing us with the State of Higher Education Latinx report. As I was listening to the report findings, I found myself reflecting on our journey at Long Beach City College and how we use data similar to the data highlighted in this report to accelerate Latinx student success at LBCC. Over the last several years, LBCC has been on a journey in moving from a colorblind approach to a race-conscious approach in serving our students, with a clear focus on Latinx and Black students. And this shift in practice and culture started with following the data. It really was through the power of inquiry, looking inward, and ultimately identifying concrete, actionable, race-conscious strategies that directly responds to the data that ultimately led to the improvements we are seeing in Latinx student success. Back in 2018, we participated in an audit of our student equity plan by the Center of Urban Education at USC. What we learned was that our student equity plan was overwhelmingly colorblind in the way we approached our equity work. This led to intentional conversations at LBCC of what it would look like to move towards a race-conscious approach in serving our students. Then in 2020, LBCC was recognized by Excelencia in Education with the Seal of Excelencia for our use of evidence-based, effective, and intentional institutional practices in serving Latinx students. The seal provided us with a framework of how to look at our data and connect it with 7 areas of focus. The 7 focus areas are enrollment, retention persistence, transfer, completion, financial aid, representation, and leadership. I'd like to share a few ejemplos that I think really highlight the work and, more importantly, the impact in using data and promoting Latinx student success. In the area of enrollment, after reviewing our data from our Long Beach College Promise, we identified that 2 of our feeder high schools had lower enrollment rates at LBCC. These 2 high schools also had higher percentages of Latinx students and low-income students. So I reached out to the principals of these high schools to meet with them and share with them their data. After discussing the data together, we decided to pilot a new strategy. Every high school senior from these 2 feeder high schools would apply to Long Beach City College. So we essentially deployed our matriculation team out to the high schools, and we went into every econ and government class. Every high school senior from these 2 high schools completed an application to Long Beach City College. We also redesigned our matriculation services and moved orientation and educational planning on site to these high schools, removing the barrier of having students find their own way to the college for these services. As a result of these efforts, we eliminated the college participation gap from these 2 high schools. We saw a 223% increase in these students completing educational plans and ultimately a 42% increase in enrollment from these focus schools at Long Beach City College. In the area of completion, we implemented a completion counseling model. Using a case management approach, we prioritize Latinx, Black, and other disproportionately impacted students based on progress towards academic milestones, such as transfer, associate degrees, and certificate completion. As a result, LBCC has improved its transfer rates by 75% in 5 years, with Latinx students transfers increasing by 19%, and in the degrees earned by Latinx students increasing by 125%. In the area of financial aid, we expanded our federal work-study opportunities to intentionally focus on recruiting Latinx and Black students to participate in federal work-study. When I first arrived at the college in 2018, we were returning over $200,000 of unspent federal work-study. Today, we return zero, and we've seen a 41% increase in the number of federal work-study positions held by Latinx students. This was an important area for us to focus on. Financial aid often does not get enough institutional focus that is needed, or it isn't always recognized as a racial equity issue. When we speak with students who leave our institutions, one of the most cited reasons was financial issues or barriers. So we've learned that addressing barriers to financial aid with a race-conscious lens is important to transforming other academic outcomes. I share these examples because it is my hope that colleges and universities will lean into the power of inquiry and using data to drive racial equity on their campuses. I would like to share some of my thoughts on the types of leadership and practice that is needed to leverage the data that is highlighted in today's report. At the Board of Trustees level, I believe it is important for boards to acknowledge their data on Latinx student success and review their institutional progress towards student success metrics using race. This can occur through a resolution or intentional discussions about student success metrics disaggregated by race at board retreats. So one example I'll give you at Long Beach City College is our trustees in the wake of the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor adopted a framework for reconciliation. And that framework provided us an opportunity as a campus to move through stages from first acknowledging to listening to convening and now catalyzing action. And so I think it's important for boards to think about the role they play in terms of providing this type of support. At the executive level, it is our role to facilitate the conditions for this type of race-conscious equity to occur on our campuses. It's important to identify a framework that your institution will use in advancing racial equity. So for example, at Long Beach, we're using a framework for reconciliation and the Seal of Excellencia to help drive much of our racial equity work on campus. Some things that you can do that I think will help these efforts take root is engage in practices of listening sessions with your faculty and staff, where you focus on understanding the experiences of minoritized students. Also, you can consider the development of cross-functional design teams that are focused on identifying race-conscious strategies and serving Latinx students. At the classroom level, I think it's really important to empower your faculty and support your faculty and efforts that support culturally inclusive and responsive pedagogies. This can occur through the implementation of a cultural curriculum audit model. This is typically a faculty-led model that infuses relevant pedagogy through an equity lens into the course syllabus and course assignments. At LBCC, we've had over 200 faculty members complete our cultural curriculum audit. Efforts like these not only support academic outcomes, but also have a profound impact on the organizational culture and climate of our institutions around mattering and affirming in the classroom. In closing, I really want to thank the Campaign for College Opportunity for advancing this research on Latinx student success. I am proud of our work at LBCC in advancing Latinx student success, and I look forward to continue to be part of this amazing community of leadership and practice committed to accelerating Latino student success. Thank you.
President Munoz, thank you so much for sharing that campus perspective and for the incredible work you are doing to intentionally improve student success and close racial equity gaps. We are grateful for your leadership and to call you a friend. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Arce. I serve as the Vice President of Policy and Advocacy with the Campaign for College Opportunity. It is now my great pleasure to welcome our next speaker, someone whose commitment to the Latinx community has been a focus of her career. State Senator Maria Elena Durazo, who also serves as the chair of the California Latino Legislative Caucus, is the daughter of migrant worker parents who graduated from St. Mary's College and entered the labor movement where she rose through the ranks into executive positions. As a state senator, she's authored legislation to expand the DREAM loan eligibility to students pursuing graduate or professional education and co-authored many bills to advance educational equity. Senator Durazo, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Sarah, very much, and for the time you've given me to be at the unveiling of your report. Very big thanks to Michelle, your entire leadership team, and everyone who's participating today. The presenters, this is very important information that we can use as legislators in Sacramento. And Audrey, I just want to say, I appreciate your reference to Latino essential workers. They are the families of our students, and those families have been critical to our survival, literally life and death survival during this pandemic. They've been critical to our economic recovery, which also can have an impact on life and death. We never had one day of food shortage, in big part due to the sacrifice of farm worker men and women. So I hope we continue to reference their contributions way past the pandemic and not forget what they've done. The Latino Legislative Caucus, which I'm very privileged to chair, has worked on education access gap, as this report confirms, a gap that was only worsened by the pandemic. And of course, continues to present a lot of challenges for us, but also for the students and students of color. The caucus is made up of 30 Latino state assembly members and senators, and we have statewide officers as well, such as Insurance Commissioner Lara and BOE member Tony Vasquez. They are elected from Northern California to the Mexican border, and more, they chair key policy and budget committees, whether it's an the education committee or an issue connected to education. Our former chair, Assemblymember Gonzalez, leads our Unseen Latinas initiative to shed particular light on the role of Latina women in California. A top priority, again, it continues to be for us as we judge and we evaluate what our specific legislation priorities are going to be, or budget priorities are going to be, is access to higher education, removing barriers, affordability, and most recently, the impact of the pandemic on learning loss. Last month, at CSUN, I had the pleasure of joining several state colleagues, legislative colleagues, Michelle representing the campaign, and witnessed Governor Gavin Newsom sign several pieces of higher education, of legislation on affordability, access, and of course, our historic budget, higher education budget, the most ever invested in higher education in our modern history, $47 billion. Historic investments in financial aid, student housing, as we heard, the revamping of transfers, and all of this is going to lead to 2021 being a landmark year for public higher education. The funding, the $47 billion, will hopefully lead us to more equitable outcomes and efficient degree pathways. One in particular amount that I want to mention is $2 billion investment to increase affordable housing for students and help address the student housing crisis that has both the funding element and key legislation. Assemblymember McCarty had a bill that was signed to create a student housing plan on outlining how projected student housing needs are going to be met. I was proud to have my bill, SB 330. It requires the LA Community College District to develop a pilot program to provide affordable housing to students or employees of LACCD on the campus with the land that is available. Making financial aid more accessible through Assemblymember Eloise Gomez-Reyes bill on requiring applications for student aid. Senator Monique had another bill on innovative ways, pushing for innovative ways with financial aid tools. And education equity is a really big issue. You mentioned SB 354 to expand loan access to Dreamer graduate students who had not had access before. And finally, I just want to say, I consider a very important issue is ethnic studies. We have to make learning more relevant to our youth, to their families. That will empower them, inspire them to go further in their lives. Now it's finally a requirement in the CSU system and in our high schools, and I know that it's well on its way in the community college system. There's still so much more work to do. When the pandemic prompted a historic shutdown of our schools, we thought this would, have last anywhere between a few weeks to a few months. Then the Delta variant surged, then just disruptions in our classrooms at all levels for almost 2 years now. We know the high cost of prolonged period of remote learning and learning loss, depression, anxiety. There's so many ways that it's taken a toll on our Black, Latino, and Indigenous communities. One additional way that we, know will have a better impact on our students is our investment in broadband with over $6 billion. So a few years ago, Assemblymember Santiago led the tuition-free College Promise program, great success. But we find that students can't succeed if they're hungry or worried about where their rent money is going to come from. They can't learn if their internet connection is poor. So it's incumbent upon us to support these students in a very comprehensive way, in every way that we can. So I look forward to continuing to work with you all and all stakeholders on things like the medical education pipeline, improved access to job and vocational training, seeking a career and a quality job through other means of higher education. And with that, thank you all very much. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Senator Durazo, for your remarks and for all that you've done for the Latinx community here in California. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sasha Renee Perez. I'm the Senior Public Affairs Manager for the Campaign for College Opportunity, and it is my great pleasure today to be hosting our student panel of these incredible student leaders. Today, I am joined by Esmeralda Esmi Quintero Cubayan, who is the president for the University of California Student Association. They are currently a student at the University of California, Santa Barbara, studying political science, sociology, and environmental studies. We also have Fabiola Moreno Morales, who is the vice president of system-wide affairs for the California State Student Association. She is currently a political science major at San Diego State University. And finally, we have Gerardo Chavez, who is the president for the Student Senate for California Community Colleges. He is currently a history major at Riverside City College. Good morning, you all. So we're going to go ahead and get started and with question number 1. And that is, what data findings stood out to you in this report, and how do they connect to your experience as a Latinx student?
I'm happy to go ahead and dive in. Thank you for having me, and hello to our lovely panelists. I think the first thing that kind of jumped out at me is specifically how many Latina students are not actually eligible to enter the 4-year public education system in California. This is something that resonates pretty heavily with myself. So I attended high school here in California, specifically Irvine, and throughout my journey, I was specifically told to not expect to attend a 4-year institution directly from my counselors, just within my own apparatus of school and the support that was supposed to be offered to me. I went to an institution that did not recognize really Latina or Indigenous students as notable parts of our campus community, even at a high school level, and that definitely impacted my ability to kind of move forward. So I pursued community college as my only option as attaining higher education and really being able to kind of center my experience of wanting to achieve social mobility as someone who comes from immigrant parents, who comes from a low-income community, that comes from a system-impacted community. And I knew that community college was my only way forward. Yet even then, I faced barriers of even learning how to transfer, which classes were necessary, which kind of brings me to the actual experience of being within VUC. I'm now entering my 3rd year at Santa Barbara, and it does not surprise me that most Latina students don't find themselves supported within VUC. Despite VUC having 5 Hispanic serving institutes, me attending one of them, the support isn't there. At the most foundational level, the support is not there. We find ourselves honestly scrambling to find community. And while there are student organizations such as Hermanas Unidas or Mujer, they provide us community and they provide us support. However, this is often on the back of an institution that has failed to actually provide for us and has actually just failed us in pretty much all totality.
Thank you for sharing that, Esme. Fabiola Gerardo, does any of what Esme shared resonate with you as well?
Yeah, I could go ahead. Can everyone hear me? Awesome, just want to make sure. Well, hello everyone and welcome to all of the guests. I am very excited to be here representing the CSUs. And so hello to my peers as well. It is very nice to see you. As a Latina in San Diego State, I could say that it was very difficult for me to find community at the beginning. And I could point to one program very specifically that helped me find that community. And it was EOP, the Education Opportunity Program. And I always go back, even in my leadership roles now, I always go back to talking about the Education Opportunity Program because through their summer bridge program, I was able to graduate from high school, enjoy my summer vacation, and then a little bit later, I came here to San Diego State, moved from Monterey Bay, 8 hours away, and was able to really integrate myself into the educational system early on. 5 weeks early from everybody. I was here, I found friends, I got a job. As a first year, I was already like knowing how to give tours, knowing where I can access things, etc. And this was me as a first year student, first generation, low income, right? Parents not going to school, parents not helping me navigate through the application process, etc. So it was an education opportunity program. It was programs like that that really, really helped me find that community at San Diego State, because if it wasn't for them, I would have been lost. And I wouldn't have had the courage to get involved in my associated students, to get involved in any other programs, or to even seek further community, right? So that I could say that I resonate with Esmeralda, and I could say that it was very hard at the beginning, but as I continued to integrate myself within the university, I saw very quickly that I was sitting next to my peers, and their parents were lawyers and were doctors and received PhDs. And my parents are farm workers and feed the country. And so when I had that realization, it made me really think like the playing field is equal. And I am here in the same classroom trying to learn the same curriculum as you. But because of the color of my skin, I will have more barriers. And so very early on, I knew that and I internalized that, and I was able to see it, which is why I became very involved and really stuck with advocating for students and making sure that they have a seat at the table everywhere, all the time, right? And are included in that higher education policymaking. So the finding that really resonated with me was one that says 78% of Latinx students who are transfers and enroll in the community colleges system, only 32% transfer within 6 years. And I'll point to a couple of things that why this happens, excuse me. And I think specifically for like Latinx women, a lot of us become parents, a lot of us become moms, and that really obstructs the way in which we could continue community colleges. I could tell you a very personal story. My oldest sister is about to turn 28 and has been trying to get her associate degree still, and she graduated 10 years ago maybe now. And this is because she had children, and she didn't have, you know, programs like EOP, and she didn't have a community and a village around her to really support her. And she is still trying to get that associate's degree. She'll continue on to her bachelor's after she gets it, but she's still there. She's still trying to take classes as she has children. So I think that's one of the reasons why you see that expansion of, like, it takes 6 years only to get an associate degree, right? I think the other one is just parents in general, you know, students with dependents. And then our untraditional students. We see in our community college system, we have a lot of untraditional students. And Gerardo can correct me if I'm wrong, but you know, we need to be able to support them. We need to really meet students where they are and not expect them to continuously give more than they need, right? Because we don't have much. So with that, I'll pass it over to Gerardo.
Thank you so much, Fabiola. And one of the things that I do want to address when I was reading this report that really resonates with my experience as a Latino man in the United States, as an immigrant from El Salvador, arriving to the United States at the age of 8. And I was automatically enrolled into ESL classes, and I was ESL all the way up till high school, especially, you know, as an immigrant, not being familiar with the college system, not being familiar that college readiness starts from the moment that you enter middle school. And nowadays is when you enroll into elementary school, that's where college readiness starts. One of the first things that I saw was 44% of Latinx high school graduates were prepared for college. And why is that? You know, from my experience was that a lot of times we saw that division on certain populations within our high schools, our middle schools are prepared and are enrolled into programs like AVID, while the rest of the high school population is left to find things by themselves. And especially if you're a first generation college student, how do you find information about EOPS? How do you find information about the Summer Bridge program, or filling out your financial aid application? Especially for me, you know, I knew that there was financial aid, and anyone who comes from a Latinx community is able to testify that within our community, there is a weird sense of receiving aid, that there's a weird sense of receiving support. My mom always tells me, well, if you're receiving support somewhere along, you know, they're going to get you and they're going to ask for that money back. So I did not apply for financial aid for my first 2 years of community college. So I had to pay out of pocket. And that's a lot of the stories that I've been hearing from many of our students. You know, I have the great privilege to be visiting colleges that are open. I already visited my 15th college yesterday at Napa Valley. And one of the #1 things that I hear is affordability and addressing the total cost of attendance. 2 years of community college is a dream, but it's not achievable with our system because many of our students are facing financial struggles. They are a source of income for their families. We saw with the pandemic, a lot of the equity barriers that are systematic and that been going on for decades, you know, just grew larger in size. Another thing that I did notice within the report is remedial courses and equitable placement to transfer level work. We saw an increase from 8% to 32% in college level math, and 20% to 56% in college level English. Many of the students that I have talked to who have taken remedial courses see remedial courses as an impediment to transfer, as a tool to gatekeep them from transfer to a 4-year university. As for myself, I had to take remedial courses because I entered the community college system in 2016. I took the placement test for English and math. I did not place, so I had to, instead of many students just heading to, transfer level work, I had to take a detour and go around those transfer level courses. And it wasn't until I took that last remedial course in 2018 where my counselor said, you don't have to take them anymore. Because of AB 705, we are not doing remedial courses in our institution. So you have to take the transfer level work either way. It is those barriers that we see that's gatekeeping our students from succeeding. And I'm one of those students who has taken a long time in community college. I fall into that 33% of students who are unlikely and face struggles in transferring to a four-year university after 6 years attending community college. I'm in my third time applying for a four-year university. I applied last year. I did not get in. I got into one. I got into Cal State Long Beach, but because, like I said, I'm a first-generation student, not many of the factors are, I'm not aware. So a lot of opportunities passed by, and I wasn't able to enroll. And in high school, I did not get into any of the four-year universities that I applied to. And what was that? Because I wasn't prepared in high school. And that's something that we need to address as system leaders, that college readiness starts from the moment that we enter K-12. But we also have to keep in mind that our systems need to be student ready rather than students having to be college ready. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing. And I don't know if you're watching the chat box at all, but there's a lot of responses coming in from other students, other staff, just saying how much your stories are resonating with them. Now, we started touching upon this already, but throughout the report, we can see that completion rates at community colleges, the CSU and the UC, continue to remain low for Latinx students. The numbers are even worse for Latino men. What do you think colleges and universities can do to better support Latinx student success? And I know some of you kind of touched upon this already, but I'd love to hear maybe, an idea that you all have that you'd like to see your system take on.
Do you want to go first?
You can go.
Thank you. I think the place where I would start is we need to stop criminalizing our community. We need to stop criminalizing Latino men, especially when it comes to our individual campuses. Like on my campus, we have UC PD or UC Police Department where Latino students are constantly racially profiled. They're constantly dealing with microaggressions. We are not even giving our students the opportunity to survive because on the other hand, we are criminalizing them. We are allowing them to face brutality. We are allowing them to starve. We are allowing them to be homeless. We are not doing our part to ensure that they can survive. That is at the root of the issue. We have done everything in our power as an institution, and allow me to not, kind of align us within our student governments with institutions, but the institutions that we work in have allowed for this to happen. We exist in a society that values whiteness, that values manhood, that values masculinity and all things that come with white supremacy at the expense of our students. And when it manifests itself in our students withdrawing. It manifests in our students giving up. It manifests in our students having to work 40 hours a week, unable to attend their lectures because they cannot even eat. And I know this experience because I work 4 jobs. At this day in time, I work as an RA, I work in my multicultural center solely to sustain myself, to be able to do the advocacy that I can do. And even outside of the realm of just men and women, my entrance to student government was as the chair of La Familia de Colores, or Queer and Trans Latina organization, and I saw that there was a desperate need for us to be heard. There is trans women, Latina trans women that are dying. There are Black trans women that are dying. And yet when we enter these campuses, I say this as a trans feminine person, my experience is that of criminalization and violence. And yet the institution turns around and says, why are you not making it? Why are you taking over 2 years to graduate? Why are you struggling to pass your classes? And the true answer is because I am facing violence every day. I am not eating every day, and I am doing what I can to get by. And yet this institution has the audacity to tell me that I'm reaching my unit limit and that I need to hurry up. That is the problem with these institutions, is that they do not see us in our humane condition. They see us as money. They see us as things that pay into their institution. They see us as profit, especially for someone like me and an R1 institution. They value my research when it relates to the criminalization of my identities and my communities, but they do not care about me actually leaving in this institution, knowing that I can tell my kids, I support you coming to UC Santa Barbara. I support you attending the UC, because at the present day, it is not true. I do not support my kids attending this institution, nor do I support them attending pretty much any educational institution if it means that their lives will be on the line. And at the very root, if we want to support Latina students, stop criminalizing them. Defund your police departments, reinvest in your cultural resource centers, reinvest in your counseling and psychological services, and stop asking Latina students to stand up when we have been standing up for the last few decades, where we have done our part, and yet you have continued to fail us in every aspect when you defund our resource centers every year. Stop asking us to stand up when you have taken the opportunity to strip us bare and told us, continue to do more. I am so heated, y'all. I am so sorry. This is not geared at us. This is geared at the institution, but stop criminalizing us. That is the main point.
Thank you, Esme. Thank you. Powerful remarks. Gerardo, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, and I concur with my fellow president colleague, Esme. We have to look at our system and where it originated in the time frame. I'm a history major, so everything that I look at is from a historical context. Our systems were created in a time where folks like us, Latinx individuals, were not meant to be in the system. Our system was created in a time where, Black and brown people were marginalized, were discriminated against, and we're not giving a fair shot for education to, get out of the stigma of being Black and brown in the United States. I agree with Esme. We need to stop criminalizing Latinx men. And we need to stop the stigma that, Latino men are, we do see, especially within the California community college system, a lot of what I've been hearing from college presidents and within our decline in enrollment, especially where I live in the Inland Empire, is that it's disproportionately affecting Latino men. And why is that? From what I see, is because there's a lack of intentional support. And we are faced with a system where it's categorizing individuals. In the absence of Latino men in the institution, we see a lack of resources that are intentional for that population. Many, and especially in our culture, Latino men are the providers of the family home. And we do see that if no one else is working, that individual has to re-enter the workforce. And in a world where you have to be competitive in corporation, you have to be competitive in the workforce, a lot of our Latino men, Latino students are facing either, do I enter the workforce or do I continue my education? And if I continue my education, how am I going to eat? How am I going to pay for my bills? How am I going to pay for rent? Those are the things that we're seeing in our system. And the reason why we're seeing that is because what we are seeing is the lack of diversity in faculty. It's really hard for faculty to understand what are the issues going when they haven't gone through those issues themselves. And it's time that we start diversifying our faculty in the CSU system, in the Cal State system, in the community college system, and in the private system, or else we cannot progress as higher education institutions. And how do we do that? By allowing students to be able to advocate for themselves and allowing students to participate in hiring committees in our institutions.
I absolutely love that I am in the room with these two right here. And I think that we're gonna have to talk after too. But you know, I also want to highlight that community colleges students are saying this, CSU students are saying this, and UC students are saying this. So across the board, we have the same problems. So what is the root cause, really? And I really think that in order for a student to be successful, they need to be recognized as a person first. Like, oh my goodness, the amount of times that I personally have had to stop paying attention to the lecture that I'm watching to simply check my debit card, to make sure that I have food for my groceries after class, to make sure that my rent is going to be paid on time, and to make sure that I have money for bills. Esmeralda, I am one job away from you. I work 3 jobs currently to merely survive too, because it is very different when you have to work to survive versus working to have a job. And when we have no other option and we have to work the amount of jobs that we have to work, that really shows the fact that that institutions aren't meeting our basic needs. And what are those? Food, housing. We talked about housing bills. Food, housing, broadband, technology, making these materials accessible, not having books cost us $100. Like, just simple practices like this could really gear us towards like meeting the students where they are, right? Institutions being ready for students, not us being ready for them, because I think a lot of us are ready for them, but I think a lot of them are ready for us. So I think that really touches on the basic needs. I think, Gerardo, when you said about culture, if, you know, I had a brother that was the same age and someone needed to go work, my brother would have to go work. And that's very much inherited in our culture. And it absolutely sucks. And it sucks that men have to be the one where it's like, go work. And I think that this happened a lot during COVID too. During COVID, that's why you see so many Latino men drop out, because they had to go back and work for their families. They had to go help their dad sustain their families during COVID. You know, it at that point, it was like my classes or my family getting fed. And obviously the family getting fed will be number one forever, you know? So it's like the culture and institutions not realizing that this is a culture and accepting it is what's really hurting us. And so that's why you see it, you know, you saw these issues exacerbated during COVID. And so really, you know, our institutions have to be creative in the way that they are accepting our cultures and helping us through it, you know, and accepting our heritage, and accepting that there is so much, like in the Latino culture specifically, there are so many narratives that need to change. Financial aid, right, being like a no-no. It's like that's not true. It's like those things also need to change. So there's a lot within the CSU. I'd say the graduation initiative 2025, the findings just came out, and we had a record high number of first-year students graduating at a higher rate, transfer students graduating at a higher rate. All this information is public. So if you just search up graduation initiative 2025 CSU, you can see it in our CSU website. From that graduation initiative, Chancellor Castro also, you know, really pinpointed at 3 initiatives that he really wants to start. So for the first one is a re-enrollment campaign starting in spring 2022, and this will really target our underserved communities. So the re-enrollment campaign will be, you know, because of COVID, lots of students dropped out, and so we're really trying to get them back into our system. Number 3 is digital planners. So the CSU system is really trying to create a cohesive digital planner for all CSU campuses to use, so students can keep track of their courses. If they add a minor, if they add a major, they could really double dip in courses, etc., because it will allow students, and especially those first-gen students, to pick courses, to navigate through the systems, etc. And the third one is really focusing out on our non-passing courses with the highest number of underserved students in them. So really focusing at those courses and looking at why aren't students passing them, and why aren't our underserved students passing them. So those are 3 of the initiatives that the Graduation Initiative 2025 folks will be working on. And I just really wanted to highlight those, since I know there's a lot of CSU students here, but yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Esme, Fabiola, and Gerardo, for sharing your experiences today and also some of the solutions. I think, the community college system, the CSU system, and the UC system can all work on. You can still see the chat blowing up, so much support. I think everything that you all have shared today is resonating with students, with faculty, with staff, with leaders all over the state. And so, for all of you that are tuning in today, I encourage you to check out CSSA, UCSA, SSCCC's website. These student leaders are at the forefront of this work within their systems, and we need to continue to do what we can to support all of the amazing and incredible things that they're doing. I'm going to go ahead now and turn it over to our Vice President for Policy and Advocacy, Sarah Arce, who's going to be covering some of the major recommendations coming out of this report, and I think will be a great way for us to kind of lead off after hearing so much feedback from our incredible student leaders.
Thank you, Sasha, and thank you again to our students who were so honest with their experiences and I think personalized many of the recommendations that you will hear me cover. If you're familiar with the campaign's work, then you know that while we love the data, we also love to agitate for policy change that is informed by the data. I will be sharing some of the recommendations that we have for policymakers and our educators across K through 12 and higher ed. So we can't start a conversation about Latinx student success without acknowledging the role that federal policy plays in improving opportunity for Latinx students. California colleges and universities serve an estimated 94,000 undocumented students, with about half having deferred action for childhood arrival or DACA status. Despite the state's commitment to support these students as college dreams, undocumented students are barred from access to federal financial aid like the Pell Grant, which poses significant gaps in their ability to afford college. That's why we must expand federal Pell Grant access to documented students and ensure these students have access to an important source of financial support. We also know that establishing a pathway to citizenship for all undocumented individuals and creating permanent solutions so that undocumented students can access financial and social resources will not only help support their college journeys, but also allow these students to enter our workforce and contribute to our economy. Next slide. For our state policymakers, we absolutely must revise and expand eligibility requirements established under the California Master Plan for Higher Education that really constrains access to our public four-year universities and no longer fits a 21st century or diversity of our state. State policymakers must commit to updating eligibility requirements, but also investing the resources to serve that expanded eligibility in order to increase the number of Latinx students directly enrolling at a UC or CSU campus. We also heard from our students, I don't need to tell you, the financial barriers and challenges they face. Getting to college is only half the challenge. Paying for college is another significant barrier. That's why California must also modernize its financial aid system to move away from a system built on outdated rationing devices like age and time out of high school, and which leaves too many Latinx students out of receiving aid. There was some good work done this year in the state budget on this end, but more needs to be done to truly ensure all Latinx students can receive the aid that they need. Finally, as a state, we should be proud of the growing number of our public higher education institutions that have received the designation of Hispanic Serving Institutions, or HSIs. Of our 23 campuses, 21 are HSIs. I'm sorry, out of our 23 CSU campuses, 21 are HSIs, and 5 of our 10 UC campuses are HSIs. However, the state should support HSIs to ensure that they are also Hispanic graduating institutions by investing additional resources specifically tied to closing racial and ethnic gaps in completion. Next slide. For our community college partners, which I know there are many of you on the webinar today, we must double down on implementing transformative policy reforms made in recent years to improve community college student success and close racial equity gaps. These include equitable placement reform, which broadens access to transfer level English and math by placing the vast majority of students directly in those classes where they will see more success versus starting in standalone remedial courses. I know Gerardo spoke to this and the importance of this. There's also a new funding formula for community colleges that funds colleges for more than just enrollment, but also the success of students. We recommend that colleges align their campus practices with the key momentum points and metrics in this new formula, like the number of students who earn an associate degree for transfer or who complete the transfer level math and English within the first year. With a large proportion of Latinx students attending the California community colleges, serving all community college students better means that more Latinx students will succeed. And as we heard from Vikash earlier, Latinx students are underrepresented at our UC system. So we call on the UC to do more to proactively increase the number of Latinx students who enroll and successfully graduate so that the system is more reflective of the diversity of California's high school population. Finally, sorry, still on the last slide, college presidents and campus leaders and governing bodies across the UC, CSU, and community college system must act with urgency and commit to identifying, hiring, retaining, and promoting Latinx faculty to increase representation that reflects their student populations and supports their students' sense of belonging and success. Next slide. And finally, for our high schools, we must intentionally change practices to better align and prepare students for college eligibility requirements. Again, you heard this from our panel. We have advocated at the campaign for many years that we make A through G courses the default curriculum in high school, and that we also require high school seniors to complete a FAFSA or California DREAM Act application. Without these measures, we know that too few Latinx students will see college as a real pathway for themselves and are less prepared for college and even for the opportunity to apply to the UC and CSU. We also know how important it is to communicate early on to students that college is a path for them, and filling out the FAFSA and making sure that they are taking the default courses they need to be eligible for UC and CSU is a critical step in that direction. I will now be transitioning to our Senior Vice President, Audrey Dow, who will lead us into our Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. If any of you know the Campaign for College Opportunity, we are always solution focused. We are not paralyzed by the bad news. Rather, we're activated in many ways by the challenge that's before us, because we know that in California, there really are there's the talent, there's the innovation, and there's the will to improve the status quo. And I'm just so honored to be with the change makers, the student leaders that are with us today, and happy to take again some of the questions that many of you put in the chat as you seek to address the challenge in Latinx degree attainment from where you stand. So I want to kick off the first we have a few questions in the chat that really focus on how do we better support Latino men in our colleges and universities. And I think we heard a lot from our student leaders articulating the real challenges and the real threat that we're under, given the fact that the data has shown a decline in Latino enrollment since the pandemic, a trend that's likely to continue if we don't take intentional action. So if we still have Dr. President Munoz on the line from Long Beach, I know that more than anything, working with men of color and supporting men of color is who you are at your core. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how you approach this work, what you're doing, and what is really the call to action for your peers.
Thank you, Audrey. So I think it really starts with intentionality. And so we really have to be declarative about who we're trying to serve. So one of the things that we've been doing is we implemented a male success initiative. And again, not a male success initiative that's kind of colorblind. Like within the focus area, we have breakouts where we're talking about issues specifically around masculinity and what it means in terms of just different things that our Latino males experience and engage with as they move through their educational experience. And then we also have opportunities where we understand better what are the barriers. So I mentioned, for example, around financial aid. We saw that our Latino males and our Black males were less likely to complete the verification process for financial aid, to get a Pell Grant, to get a Cal Grant, to get connected with federal work study. And so in terms of how we prioritize different students within the queue, in terms of how we work with them, we used our equity data. And we identified that we're going to start with Black males and Latino males in terms of how we work with these students in completing these different milestones that ultimately get them the financial aid they need so that they can be successful. We heard our amazing student leaders talk about the impact of what it's like to have to work so many hours per week, or worry about how they're going to go ahead and pay for food or textbooks and these types of experiences, which many of us, and I had those experiences as well when I was a student, we go through. And so it's being very intentional about using the data in the way in which we serve our students. I think it's also about, like I said, having culturally responsive interventions and strategies that aren't colorblind. Like I mentioned, in terms of not just the focus on the academic outcomes, but also some of those psychosocial outcomes that we think our students also need support with. And then lastly, I think most importantly, is you need to hold yourselves accountable. So we have I always joke around, I got dashboards on dashboards on dashboards. Like I have dashboards for days because we have to constantly be looking at the data. When the Pell numbers are dropping, when the federal work study numbers are dropping, when students aren't logging into Canvas, we have to respond. And so you use the data to drive the interventions and the strategies in a way that's not colorblind. And I think that's, or gender blind. And so I think that's what we're trying to do. And these are the shifts that we're making, and we're seeing it have impact.
Thank you, President Munoz. I appreciate the role that data plays in being intentional, and how it has to be a committed and ongoing practice. And everybody on your institution needs to be able to collect, look, and act on data. I think that's something that all of us have learned from our fearless chair at the Campaign for College Opportunity, Dr. Estela Ben-Simon, who says we all have a role in inquiry and action. The next question I want to pose is to our report author, Dr. Reddy, really around how, since our last report, has enrollment changed for Latinx students? Are we observing any trends in where Latinx students are enrolling when they choose to go to college since our last report?
Since our last report, I think the numbers have stayed fairly similar. I actually think, at the UC, we reported, I'm looking at it now, 27% of the student body was Latinx, according to the IPEDS data. That's now down to 25. A couple of percentage points is hard to interpret. I'm a statistician, among other things. So, I think I would say it's been fairly consistent. I think the thing that we're all really watching right now is what COVID does to our communities of color and enrollment in college. National data from the National Student Clearinghouse has been pretty clear that we're seeing some enrollment drops with the Latinx population. And so an intentionality around, making sure that students are supported to enroll and re-enroll, that, the health needs are met. We've heard about basic needs from other folks today, so I won't belabor that. But, I think in the last few years, we haven't seen a dramatic shift.
Thank you, Vikash. Next question is for Sarah Arce, our Vice President of Policy. There are some questions in the chat that really focus on the issue of capacity, right? In the presentation, we heard a lot about today the fact that there is limited capacity at our CSU and UC systems for students to go directly into those systems, and that's by design. We all know that the 1960s master plan for higher education essentially relegates 70% of all of our students to the California community college system and expects in that plan that the system will make that dream of 2-year transfer come true. What are some of the policy levers that really have some potential to change and expand that capacity at UC and CSU?
Sure, thank you, Audrey. I do like this question. This is a conversation that I feel like comes up every year with the state legislature and governor. And every year we have a conversation about how much we're going to expand enrollment. And we have over the last few, or I would say around 7 to 8 years, expanded enrollment and at the UC and CSU by 1,000 seats here or there, every year. But we clearly are not at sort of the pre-recession levels in terms of our capacity at these institutions. So something that the campaign has advocated for is that the state set an ambitious statewide goal of ensuring that 60% of Latinx Californians in the workforce hold a degree or high value credential by 2030. We know that our economic future depends on ensuring 60% of our residents hold that degree or credential. And we think that establishing a formal degree attainment goal codified in law that contains sort of specific trackable annual attainment targets for Latinx students helps get us there, but helps guide our investments, importantly, in increasing that capacity that we know we need. I spoke about this earlier as well, but that goes hand in hand with revising and expanding the eligibility requirements under the master plan for higher education. We need to really be rethinking that and coming up with a new plan that really reflects the 21st century needs of our economy and also the diversity of our state. And I think those statewide kind of tools and levers can help guide our policy and budgetary investments so that we're not having this conversation year to year, but that we're really thinking long term about who needs to enroll into our system and how we get there.
Thank you so much, Sarah. The next question I'm going to ask Dr. Munoz to answer, and then I'd love for a couple of our students to also chime in. And the question is about really awareness. How do we ensure that Latino students coming through the pipeline that may not be supported by their high schools to think about college, to think about or actually understand what the different options are, how do we make sure that they don't get lost in the pipeline and that a high school diploma ends up being their highest level of attainment? I know that you've done some intentional work with your school district to capture as many students as possible. So love to get your thoughts and a little bit about what you've done, and then we'll go to some of our students.
Thank you. It's an excellent question. I think it's really important, and it really, I think, is incumbent upon educational leaders at the community college sector, because I think we're in between the university and the K-12 to be that convener for partnerships. We have AB 19, which is the California Promise. And so there's opportunities to leverage those resources to bring the K-12 partners and the university partners to the table to really talk about the pipeline and understand where those leakages points are and begin to actually have concrete strategies that address them in a way, again, that is race conscious. So not just your standard matriculation services. As I mentioned, we are race conscious in the way we approach some of our matriculation services. We're intentional about going to Jordan High School. We're intentional about going to Gabriel High School and doing compulsory applications, because that's what the data tells us works. I always say equity is not about sameness. It's not about treating everyone the same and applying the same types of interventions and strategies. It's really about directing the resources in a way that's race conscious, that's gonna basically eradicate these gaps. And so I think it's really important to see ourselves in the role as conveners. It's also important for us to have what I call, like, let's be real, the college choice process is oftentimes can feel a little linear. Things happen around a timeline. So even if you just start there and say, okay, you know what, we're gonna send, so one of the things we do at with our Long Beach College Promise is I send a joint letter signed by both myself and the president from Long Beach State to every graduating, or not graduating, but every senior in Long Beach Unified, letting them know that the promise is here for them and the benefits of it. And we also do it in English and Spanish, right? And we're working on having it translated in Khmer. So I think it's really important to be able to have, like I said, even if you just have some what I call like just early stages of implementation, some clear milestones that you're tracking and monitoring across the college choice process continuum, that as educators we can say, okay, this is what we're going to do as the floor. Like, this is the floor. You know, we're going to send out letters. We're going to show up at college nights. We're going to have Noche de las Familias. We're going to have the kind of a set portfolio or set suite of services that we all commit to. And then you start there. And then what happens is usually there's excitement, enthusiasm, and momentum around the success, and you continue to build from there. But it's always about following the data and leveraging relationships and the power of relationships and partnerships, as well as capitalizing, like I said, on AB 19 College Promise resources. I think there's a real opportunity there for us to do something transformational in our communities.
Thank you, President Munoz. Fabiola, Esme, or Gerardo, would one of you like to take this one as well?
Yes, I do want to echo what President Munoz said about being intentional with our outreach. You know, when I visited colleges in our system, a lot of the welcome centers, you know, we're not able to provide tours since the colleges were closed, and we saw innovation and resilience in our system that those welcome centers became the outreach for high schools. And the students who were providing tours to visitors on campus now became liaisons between the college and high schools. And we saw that mentorship that our students, our high schoolers, do really need. You know, when I was in high school, I would appreciate it if someone came to my classroom and said, like, hey, community college, this is what we do. This is what we offer. You know, you have hopes and you can make it. So going back to that principle that we need to be able to outreach our high schoolers and make sure that they're aware about the opportunities that are available in the community college system. Define that stigma that community college is a second option. We know that for many of our Latinx students, community college is an option, and that is all right, and that is great, because community college system is a place where you're able to explore your career, you're able to explore your major, and then go to a four-year university. And also making sure that we are educating families, parents, so they're able to support their children, their high schoolers, in order for them to succeed and have the familial support that many of us lack in our journeys throughout high school. I know that if a counselor had talked to my mom and provided more information about financial aid in the programs and opportunities that are available at community college, you know, my life would have changed. So I think that's something that we need to do, be intentional in who we are involving in the journeys of high schoolers, so that we were able to bring them in the community college, prepare them for university.
Thank you so much, Gerardo. Fabiola, last response. Thank you for, go ahead.
I'll piggyback off of that really quickly. It needs to be intentional, very intentional, especially for our Latinx families. I mean, you know, talking to parents, working parents that probably work 4 a.m. to 6 p.m. jobs, most of us, they're not going to have energy / time to really dive into their children's studies, education. Not because they don't want to, but because they simply do not have the time or are able to understand those sort of things. So it needs to be really intentional in terms of language, right? Making sure that we go to them with those who speak Spanish, making sure we go in that way. And then also our K through 12, you know, when I was in elementary school, college was not a thing, but now my little brother, who is 7, knows about college. I knew about college when he was in kinder. So, you know, it really starts there, really changing those practices. And then dual enrollment. I know a lot of people in the chat were focusing on dual enrollment. Dual enrollment does greatly help. And it's those relationships, like President Munoz said, in our community college systems, in our high school, very targeted with those high schools that are in underrepresented communities as well.
Thank you so much, Fabiola. And thank you to all of you for joining us today. I encourage and invite each one of you to read the full report. It is incredibly well done. It's beautiful and it's compelling. But I don't just encourage you to read the report and share it. I encourage you to interrogate it, interrogate the data, interrogate the policies that are hindering Latinx student success, but also those that are promoting Latinx student success. After you've interrogated, I challenge you to act. As Sarah Arce shared during the recommendations portion of this webinar, there is something each and every one of us can do from where we stand. I think I was incredibly moved today by the compelling student stories, reminding us that behind all of the data and trends that we're looking at are real stories, real people, real students who have real lives, who have parents often depending on them, who have younger siblings that they're inspiring. And despite all of the bureaucratic and systematic barriers that we throw at them, they still rise, they still thrive, they're still here to inspire us and remind us of the commitment we made to them in the California Master Plan for Higher Education, of a spot and an opportunity for college, a better life, a more better society and democracy for all. So with that, we have the challenge and opportunity before us. Thank you again for joining us today, and have a wonderful rest of your week.